So I want to thank Sue and the Casey Foundation for inviting me to be part of this. I'm certainly learning a lot, and I have one prediction for John, which is if you want to predict what's going to happen, just look at alcohol. And one thing about the price in alcohol is, one you missed, is the industry will concentrate. We've gone from 500 beer firms in the US in 1980 to 2. So, all right, but we'll get to that. So, alcohol, welcome to my world. This is the leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds all over the world, with the exception of the Eastern Mediterranean, that's the influence of Islam. But otherwise, #1 cause of death. The US, #1 drug problem among young people. About 10 million young people drink. 6.1 million report binge drinking. Every day, 4,500 kids in this country start drinking. Every year, we lose about 4,700 people under 21 as a result of alcohol. And the earlier young people start drinking, the worse the consequences. Those who start drinking before age 15 are 5 times more likely to have alcohol problems than those who wait until they're 21, 4 times more likely to become addicted, 6 times more likely to be in a physical fight, more than 6 times more likely to be in a motor vehicle crash, and almost 5 times more likely to suffer from other unintentional injuries like falls and drowning. So overall, 3rd leading cause of death, 80,000 deaths a year, related to more than 200 disease categories. That's why people ask me about alcohol and the heart. I say it'd be great for the heart if it were the only organ in your body. Alcohol is abundantly not an ordinary commodity. So I was asked to talk about lessons from alcohol. This is lesson #1. Marijuana should not be seen as an ordinary commodity. The market is suited to ordinary commodities, but the market will not regulate alcohol in a way that's healthy for young people. And you'll need research over and over again to show how marijuana is not an ordinary commodity, and in particular, the toll of marijuana use on young people. So marijuana control systems need to be carefully planned and maintained. Forgive me if I'm being obvious, but the maintained part there is absolutely critical given the alcohol experience. All right, little history lesson. The lessons of prohibition, it didn't work. It was actually great for health. Alcoholism rates, cirrhosis death rates went through the floor almost overnight when prohibition was passed. And then you can see as it came up again, as it was legalized again, the numbers crept forward. So here's another lesson of prohibition that you won't learn in the history books or from Boardwalk Empire, which is that in 1910, the alcohol taxes were close to 1/3 of the federal budget. So when prohibition passed, big trouble, no longer have those taxes. Between 1921 and 1928, the income tax increased by 165% to pick up the slack. The failure of prohibition was partly fiscal. And post-prohibition, because the money was so important, the federal government did, like in effect they're doing with alcohol, let's let the states experiment, et cetera. But they kept alcohol policy in the Treasury Department, because the most important thing to them was keeping the money supply flowing. So that's lesson 2. Do not let the government get drunk or high on the revenues. The last thing we need is another drug-dependent revenue source. The best place for marijuana regulation is not the Treasury or Fiscal Department. It needs to be regulated by medical and public health authorities. And the tax income from marijuana needs to be secondary and incidental and not central to the regulation of marijuana, or you get the prohibition effect. Okay. Moving on after prohibition, so some of the things that led to it, the crash of the stock market, the American Federation of Labor argued that repeal would have a soothing effect on the working man. In 1932, John D. Rockefeller, very importantly, came out for repeal. Sloan from GM followed soon afterwards. FDR endorsed it in his acceptance speech. The ball was rolling. So we got the 21st Amendment in 1933. 1934, alcohol taxes are back. This time, though, they're only 9.5% of federal revenues because, of course, they didn't get rid of the income tax. But still, 9.5% is a substantial amount of revenue. So another piece of the after repeal story started before repeal, and it started in a setting very much like this, which is between 1905 and 1907, John D. Rockefeller organized something called the Committee of 50, which was a group of legislators, experts, concerned citizens, etc., that he sponsored coming together, like the Casey Foundation, to think about what should happen should prohibition fail. And what they said is they could see that prohibition was going to be in trouble. The public has seen the law defied, a whole generation of habitual lawbreakers, schooled in evasion and shamelessness, courts ineffective through fluctuations of policy, delays, perjuries, negligencies, and other miscarriages of justice, and officers of the law double-faced and mercenary. Well, cut out the mercenary and you have marijuana. Hopefully cut out the mercenary. So what that Rockefeller Commission said is, in the first place, the new system has to be rooted in what the people of each state sincerely desire. So, rooted in the states, let the states, because popular opinion is considered so important. Now, one criticism of this is of the guy who can't get his dog to go under the bed. So he says, I will be ordered, go under the, he can't get the dog to come out from under the bed. So he says to the dog, I will be obeyed, stay under the bed. Not exactly a way to write laws. But the Rockefeller plan was model legislation for two kinds of state systems. State-run monopolies, which were going to be based on Scandinavia and Canada, for retail sale of off-premise consumption of alcohol above 3.2%, and a license system modeled on the English license system, giving a single nonpartisan board appointed by the governor statewide authority to issue liquor licenses and regulate the industry. And that model legislation was incredibly influential, and it is what we have today. We have now 17 monopoly states as a result of what happened in Washington, and the rest are licensed states. But key elements of that control system that were put in place in 1933 were high taxes to control economic availability, producer self-restraint on marketing. The distilled spirit people said, oh no, we'll never market. They wrote into their code they'd never be on television. In 1996, they rewrote their code, nobody noticed. 2001, they started advertising on TV, 1,900 ads. By 2009, 62,000 distilled spirits ads on TV. Never mind. Then control on physical availability with the license or monopoly systems. This was well thought out. It's a good system, but it wasn't maintained. So it's a good model. Build a control system based on what the World Health Organization calls the 3 best buys for alcohol control. Control of economic availability, control of social availability, and control of physical availability. So let's look at these a little bit. Economic availability. Alcohol taxes, in this way, alcohol is an ordinary commodity. The more it costs, the less people drink. And adolescents and problem drinkers are no exception to the rule. Increased alcoholic beverage taxes and prices are related to reductions in alcohol-related problems. This is not a contested literature. This is hundreds of studies having done thousands of estimates over and over again based on real-world experience. This is what happens. It is, in this sense, an ordinary commodity. What do we want to do with alcohol? We want to base the taxation on the alcohol content of the beverage. We want it indexed for inflation. And we want a minimum price below which things don't go, so that you don't get incredible discounting, cheap alcohol, and so on. We don't have that. But that would be the ideal. This is what we have. These are the federal taxes. This is 1970 to 2005, and yeah, it doesn't take a science expert to see that those curves are all going down. There's a bump in 1991. That was the Bush the first tax increase. It's lost 40% of its value since it was raised in 1991. These are excise taxes. They're based on the volume of the product, not the price. So they go down with inflation. In essence, this industry gets a tax cut every single year. State excise taxes, the same thing. This is a quote from one of my colleagues in Texas. She calls state alcohol taxes a poorly performing revenue source, because every year they make up less of the state's total budget because they're worth less. They're not keeping up, so they're not playing their fiscal role over time. But even more importantly, from our perspective, they're not playing their alcohol control role over time. And the result is, off-premise, beer is often cheaper than water, orange juice, milk, and soda. That's the wrong message to kids, and that's the really scary thing to me about John's presentation. If marijuana becomes cheaper than tobacco, that is totally the wrong message for kids. It's widely discounted on-premise, and so every year alcohol becomes more economically available. Kids are price sensitive. It affects them. Social availability. Oy, what a nightmare. Alcohol advertising is almost entirely self-regulated. We just did a content analysis of 1,000 alcohol ads in magazines based on the federal codes and the industry self-regulatory codes. I think we found 38 that were in violation. Almost all of them passed the codes. It's just the codes aren't worth the paper that they're written on. They're so vague, they're unenforceable, and so on. But this is a $1 trillion a year industry globally, heavily concentrated among a few large companies. And in the US, they spend about $4 billion a year marketing. They claim advertising has no relationship to consumption, and they claim self-regulation works because there are very few complaints. In fact, the Beer Institute has never found a beer ad in violation of its code. That's good work. So lesson 4, control the size and power of the industry. Absolutely critical. Alcohol companies spent $20 million on lobbying at the federal level alone in 2010. They have 1 lobbyist to every 2 members of Congress. That's a really good teacher-to-student ratio. Between 2000 and 2010, before the floodgates really started opening from Citizens United, they gave $150 million to state legislators. Much of this money designed to prevent alcohol taxes from raising at the state level. Anheuser-Busch, we were told at one point, had in their state lobbyist contract, if the tax goes up in your state, you're fired.
Wow. There's no sense.
Okay.
Wow.
So product design. This is an important part of social availability. Welcome to Alcopops. Smirnoff Ice. When they first came out, this is what the industry was saying. This is a way to put the Smirnoff name on the tips of millions of echo boomers' tongues. That's in 2003. Who are the echo boomers? Americans born from 1980 to 1995. So when the industry said this, those kids were between 8 and 23 years old. And of course, the beauty of the category is that it brings in new drinkers, people who really don't like the taste of beer. Anheuser-Busch, 85% of people in the US start drinking before they're 21. Who are the new drinkers? People who are under 21. Average age of first use among 12 to 17-year-olds, about age 14. Every day, 4,500 young people among 16 start drinking. But we have surveys. In 2004, the height of the Alcopops marketing, in every age group, alcohol was most popular among the youngest age groups among the drinkers. 78% of current 8th grade drinkers, 71% of 10th grade drinkers, 65% of 12th grade drinkers, and only 42% of current drinkers ages 19 to 30 had had an Alcopop in the last month. And they were most popular with females in every age group. Part of this is all about targeted marketing. You'll set loose a marijuana industry, and you will have an industry identifying poorly performing consuming groups. That is the people who don't smoke marijuana, and trying to encourage them to start smoking. And this is what Alcopop marketing looks like today. This is a very recent ad. Why fit in when you were born to stand out? Yes, that's a quote from Dr. Seuss. But this is supposedly adult marketing. The offshoot, the alcoholic energy drinks, those of you in state AG's offices, we're very grateful to you for having been the catalyst behind getting rid of the stimulants in these, but they are still a binge in a can. This is 23.5 ounces of 12% alcohol sold as a single serving. That's the equivalent of 4.5 to 5 beers in a single can. All right. So alcohol industry self-regulation, I'll let you be the code board. They're not supposed to contain any lewd or indecent images or language. How many of you think this breaks the code? Let's just see a show of hands. Models are supposed to be a minimum of 25 years old. These are the Miller Lite Facebook page taste ambassadors. Amanda, it's really cute. She's a question mark. Jessica, age 21. Code violation? Doesn't take rocket science to do this. Lewd or indecent images or language. Do you know what your O face is? You're like so totally old. Your O face. That is the face you make when you reach sexual climax. Oh. Yeah, so what's your O face? And then the one in the middle, I love this one. She's adjusting her lipstick in his belt buckle. Why is she at belt buckle level needing to adjust her lipstick?
Better light.
Yeah, thank you. Not supposed to contain or depict the image of Santa Claus. Oh well. Should be situations where beverage alcohol is being consumed excessively or in an irresponsible manner. So this is a Smirnoff Ice responsibility ad. It says, know your limit, and then shows you 4 bottle caps of Smirnoff Ice. Depending on the size of the bottle, that is as much as 4 times the US dietary guideline for women. Know your limit. Okay, a few more. Natural marijuana, just think about replace marijuana for this. I don't make these up. Natural vodka, natural beer, vodka from soy and gluten-free, organic tequila, natural tequila, natural juice. This is one of those 23.5-ounce binge in a can, but it's natural. And here's one of those same products, but it has natural Brazilian healing powers. Known for centuries for its mystical healing powers. Whoa. They're fitness friendly. Can't you see fitness marijuana? Get a personal trainer from Holland. It has antioxidants. Never mind that it's a carcinogen. It has antioxidants. It's a smart choice. It's a full-speed product. It's a diet drink. Only 95 calories. The lightest beer in the world. And it advertises on the Weight Watchers page. You can be good and still have a good time because it's the lightest beer in the world. Even the can is slim. No carbs, no question, and on and on. So what impact does this have? We have the research, what it does to kids. We've got more than 14 studies at this point that have followed groups of young people over time from before they started drinking, measured their media exposure at various points in time, and their drinking behavior. What those studies all find is no matter where the marketing is, the more kids see it, the more likely they are to start drinking, or if already drinking, to drink more. Whole range of places that the studies have been done. My center, it's incredibly innovative. We do what the industry does. We rent Nielsen and Arbitron and things like that, and we track who's actually seeing the ads. Are they actually being targeted to adult audiences? In fact, in magazines in 2008, young people 12 to 20 saw 10% more beer ads and 16% more ads for Alcopops in magazines, but 73% fewer ads for wine. The majority of youth exposure in magazine comes from magazines that they're more likely to be reading per person than adults. Radio, 1 in 11 ads were in violation of the industry's incredibly weak self-regulatory standard where they won't advertise any place where kids are more than 30% of the audience. But a third of the ads were on programming that kids were more likely to hear than adults. In TV, about 20% of the ads are on programs that kids are more likely to be watching per person than adults. How many of you watch 1,000 Ways to Die? How many of you have ever heard of 1,000 Ways to Die? Okay, you've seen me before, or you have kids. But it's loaded with alcohol ads. American Horror Story? Okay, a couple of you. Like I said, not really adult programming. The ads on that programming accounted for about 44% of youth exposure to alcohol ads on TV, the programs that kids were more likely to be watching than adults. Stunning increase in the last 10 years. I did the distilled spirits numbers, but the ads exposure of young people is growing faster on television than the exposure of any other group. Yeah?
Have you done any research on alternative forms of media? Because kids are now gravitating to Hulu or so.
I'll get there. We got the social media going on, the rap and hip hop, music lyrics, etc. So all right, TV, we talked about that. I'm going real quick. This is definitely branded activity. This isn't the whole industry, which is why if you do, and the industry will trot out studies, and the marijuana industry will do this, they'll trot out studies. They'll say, look, this is what we spend on advertising, and this is what's happening with consumption, so therefore advertising doesn't do anything. Well, it's only a few brands that are heavily exposing the youth market. 5% of them in magazines, 8% in television, 4% on radio, and we've now done the first ever youth alcohol beverage consumption survey by brand. Surprise, surprise, it looks really different than what adults drink. And it looks really different for the males and the females. With the young women, look at the Alcopops effect. The Alcopops effect has been driving young women to the Alcopops and the spirits brands that the Alcopops were named after. Bacardi Silver to Bacardi, Smirnoff Ice to the whole Smirnoff family of vodkas. Facebook, very hard to get similar demographic data, so we can't do the same kinds of studies. We're just fielding, probably next week, the first ever national survey of youth and adult exposure to alcohol marketing and social media, so we'll get some data. But we know the kids are on the sites because we can track back from the photos that they posted there. These are all posted on alcohol brand sites. All these kids are under 21. What I don't want you to have to do in marijuana is turn the somersaults that we have to turn in alcohol in order to make a case that this is targeting of young people. I had to unlearn the word targeting years ago because targeting implies intent. We don't have the internal documents like they did for tobacco. But we can do studies, we can model, et cetera. And fortunately for us, there was a case in California, Lockyer versus Reynolds, on the tobacco side under the master settlement agreement where the courts at 2 levels in California laid out a definition of targeting. So we said, okay, what the heck? Let's test that definition on our alcohol data. The green line there is 18 to 20-year-olds. Their exposure has grown on TV faster than any other group. So let me come back to this. So we tested the Lockyer. It's got 3 pegs. You got is 18 to 20-year-old exposure equal to 21 to 24? Yes, in 4 of the 7 years we looked at. Are there comparable products that don't target? Yes, wine. Can alternative schedules be created? We've got all the data. We simply simulate moving the ads around, and yes, we can reduce youth 18 to 20-year-old exposure by as much as 50% with no impact on age 21 to 24-year-old exposure. In other words, they don't have to hit the underage group as heavily as they do, but they do. So implementation failure, product development's regulated by the Treasury Department. Remember lesson 2? Don't put this in the hands of the Treasury Department, okay? Or you get Alcopops. Alcohol marketing abounds. Alcohol advertisers police themselves, and the codes are vague, and enforcement is rare. So lesson 5, ban the marketing. Don't put yourself through what we have to go through in alcohol. Just get rid of it. Marketing of medicines is more tightly regulated. There is precedent. But man, once the madmen get hold of marijuana, the floodgates will open and the tide will be difficult to turn. So this is where I go to the mic and I say, get out now while you can. Okay, then physical availability, license systems. Okay, there are 3 main provisions there: state licensing of the industry, tied house restrictions that were designed to prevent vertical integration in the industry, so producers can't own wholesalers who can't own retailers, and fair trade provisions that in effect tried to cut out some of the price competition at the bottom of the market by permitting producers to set their prices. Implementation failure, let's talk about monopoly states. Let's talk about what happened in Washington State and Costco. And Costco's a wholesaler and a retailer, and they sued and lost in court, and so they funded $40 million for a ballot initiative, and they won. And only 23 million. Oh, gee. They won. Pennsylvania. Who's here? We got a gentleman here from Pennsylvania. Yeah. Currently debate over privatization. So lesson 6, create and safeguard state-run monopolies. In alcohol, we love the state-run monopolies because they're economically inefficient. They make it cost more. They make it less available. It's really good for public health. So create them and put them under control of health authorities. Remember lesson 2. Little lesson in implementation failure. Maryland, my own state, we're a licensed state. Controls devolved to local licensing boards. And our liquor board was just audited, and this is from the Baltimore Sun editorial. Liquor boards are traditional dumping grounds for political patronage, and there are all sorts of opportunities for mischief and favoritism. But Baltimore's liquor board exists on a level of incompetence that is likely unparalleled in Maryland. What did they find? They find that they failed to document that new outlets were supposed to be at least 300 feet from schools and churches. This was in the regulations. They just forgot to enforce it for years. The auditors tried filing test complaints. 311 of the ones that they filed, half of them were closed without resolution by the investigators they filed them with. And then 202 of our 1,200 outlets were not inspected at all in a year. None of the inspectors met the internal quota of 4 inspections a day, and Tess Monahan's a fictional detective character in Baltimore. It's a series by Laura Lippman, and the running joke in that is that her father's a liquor inspector. He goes to work every day to show how you can go to work every day and not do any work. The data. The problem with this is that, and this will be true of marijuana as well, and I hate that we have to prove it in research over and over and over again, the more the availability, the more the consumption, and the more the problems. So if you've got a greater number of outlets, you'll have greater problems. More violence and crime, sexually transmitted infections, noise, injuries, property damage. And this has been studied in city after city across the country, very well documented in the literature. Also, they will tend to be located in minority and poor communities. Blacks face higher density than whites. Minorities in lower income neighborhoods have more liquor stores, and minority youth have more liquor stores in their neighborhoods. A young person in Baltimore is 15 times more likely to see a liquor store than a supermarket in their neighborhood. Lesson 7, fund robust policy research on the marijuana experiments. Alcohol, we've got the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. The vast amount of their money goes into research on addiction. Addiction's really important, absolutely. But a sliver of it goes to the policy research that is critical for testing the effectiveness of and defending the control systems that are in place. And it's defending the control systems that I am fighting rearguard battles on alcohol all over the country every day. I use every shred of research we've got, and there are all these research questions that I wish we'd been studying for the last 30 years that we didn't. What does all this take? It takes having the public with us. Effective implementation of these control systems is not going to work well if they're being put in place on a public that is dead set against what you're trying to do. This is one of the lessons for me of prohibition, that we have to stay with public opinion. But I'm in public health. We know a lot about how to shape public opinion. How many of you are politicians? So you know something about how to shape public opinion. We know how to do this, but part of what's important in doing this is having the boots on the ground. And so my lesson 8 is support a social and popular movement for control. The industry has money already, and it will have even more money the more that marijuana is available. And In our political system, the only way you combat money is with numbers, with people, with faces, with stories. The biggest gains worldwide on alcohol have not come through well-intentioned public health researchers like me talking way too fast to well-intentioned groups of policymakers like you. They've come from social movements. Just folks need the opportunities to weigh in and have their voices at the table about the effects of the experiments. So, to summarize, marijuana is not an ordinary commodity. Don't let the governments get drunk on the revenues. Build a control system based on the 3 best buys of controlling physical, social, and economic availability. Control the size and power of the industry. Ban the marketing. Create and safeguard state-run monopolies. Fund a robust policy research portfolio on your marijuana experiments. And support a social and popular movement for marijuana control. There, I'm done. Now I can go back to alcohol. Thanks.
Oh.